We talked about the formation of the American Baptist Anti-Slavery Convention, the open letter that they sent to Baptists in the South with a very strong admonition for them to do everything they could to get rid of slavery if they could not affect the laws in the various states, to leave and go to a place where they could free whatever slaves they might have possessed, or even if they didn't, to go to a place where the laws did not allow to be held in bondage a single slave. And so this 1840 separation obviously increased the tension between East and West and convinced the South that there were many in the North who were unwilling to be united with them in the common benevolences that they had founded together. And so in 1841, Richard Fuller, who was a pastor in the South, Beaufort, South Carolina, had been a lawyer, was really an excellent preacher, and who himself, according to just an article I read, owned about 200 slaves himself. Richard Fuller put forth what is called a neutrality resolution for the Home Mission Society. Now, this neutrality resolution stated that the purpose of the Union of Baptists in the United States was to unite the finances and unite the spiritual commitments of all Baptists for the church planting in domestic areas and in the General Missionary Convention, to send people to the foreign field, that the issues of slavery and non-slavery, while people in their individual capacities still could argue for what they felt was right in that particular issue, that this resolution was not intended to infringe on the personal rights of any person, but it was simply designed to say that if the issue of slavery is raised within the framework of the various societies, that it renders any kind of discussion related to that null and void, that to introduce the object of slavery was not a part of the purpose of these conventions. So the neutrality resolution was discussed and it was passed. It became a part of the official working of the Home Mission Society, and then was also seen as a policy for the Baptist General Tract Society and the General Missionary Convention. Things continued to be tense. This tension was increased in 1842 and 1843 when news articles appeared in Baptist papers from the North that questioned the actions of the Home Mission Society. Two people who had been appointed as home missionaries, William Tryon and James Huckins, were appointed with the knowledge that they owned slaves, and they took their slaves with them to their assigned places where they were going to do work. I think James Huckins was in Texas. William Tryon was being appointed to someplace else. But one owned slaves himself, and so didn't see any way simply to release them without any means of support. So he took them with him. One had inherited slaves. He had married. His wife had slaves, and so they took their slaves with them to their appointed place. And this was pointed out, and there was some questioning about the validity of this or about the wisdom of it. So this showed that the reality of Southerners who owned slaves participating in these common missionary enterprise was being questioned severely. This led then to an attempt on the part of the Georgia Baptist Convention to test as to whether or not a slave owner would be appointed in light of this new tension. So the Georgia Baptist Convention submitted the name of a man, James E. Reeve, as an possible appointment for a position as a church planter, basically. The position was defined a little bit differently, but that's basically what it meant, to work with basically an unreached people within the within the confines of the United States, and they volunteered in this application that he was a slave owner. The application was returned. James E. Reeve was not officially rejected. There was no acceptance or rejection, but the application was returned because the information had been volunteered that he was a slave owner, which violated the neutrality resolution. The subject of slavery had been introduced into the application. And so the board of the Home Mission Society simply returned this and said, we're sorry, we cannot process this, we cannot take any action on Mr. Reeve because this is in violation of a resolution that we have agreed to abide by as of 1841. So that did not satisfy the Baptists of the South. They were all looking to see what would happen when this subject was introduced. They knew that it was a violation of the neutrality resolution, but they realized also that the tensions were increasing and that there was an increasing amount of pressure placed on those who still remained within the United Benevolences. As I mentioned, the American Baptist Home Mission, the American Baptist Anti-Slavery Convention had already separated, but there's this increasing tension within the organization. So when the Home Mission Society Board did not process this application, Alabama Baptists then sent to the acting board of the General Missionary Convention, the foreign mission body, a statement asking for a distinct and explicit avowal concerning the eligibility of slaveholders to all of the common privileges of their union. So, one of the phrases in the Reeve case, the American Baptist Home Mission Society said, therefore, that to introduce the subjects of slavery or anti-slavery into this body is a direct contravention of the whole letter and purpose of the said Constitution, and is, moreover, a most unnecessary agitation of topics with which the society has no concern, over which it has no control, and as to which its operations should not be fettered, nor its deliberations disturbed. The Home Mission Society, being only an agency to disperse the funds confided to it, according to the wishes of the contributors, therefore our cooperation in this body does not imply any sympathy either with slavery or anti-slavery, as to which societies and individuals are left as free and uncommitted as if there were no such cooperation. We disclaim attributing to our Georgia brethren a design to disturb the deliberations of the board by introducing the subject of slavery through the medium of their application, but such evidently is its tendency. In the opinion of several members of the board, the application seeks the appointment, not in the usual manner, merely of a missionary, but of a slaveholder, and is designed as a test whether the board will appoint a slaveholder as a missionary. And this, in the language of the Society's resolution, in direct contravention of the whole letter and spirit of the Constitution. So that's the language that was used about the Reeve case. Now, the Alabama resolution came in November of 1844. Begins this way. You understand all these are historical documents. Whereas the holding property in African Negro slaves has for some years excited discussion as a question of morals between different portions of the Baptist denomination, united in benevolent enterprise, and by a large portion of our brethren is now imputed to the slaveholders in these southern and southwestern states as a sin, at once grievous, palpable, and disqualifying. Resolved by the convention of the Baptist denomination in the state of Alabama that when one party to a voluntary compact among Christian brethren is not willing to acknowledge the entire social equality of the other as to all the privileges and benefits of the Union, nor even to refrain from impeachment and annoyance, united efforts between such parties, even in the sacred cause of Christian benevolence cease to be agreeable, useful, or proper. Then several more of these included this particular resolve. Resolve that our duty at this crisis requires us to demand from the proper authorities in all those bodies to whose funds we have contributed or with whom we have in any way been connected the distinct, explicit avowal that slaveholders are eligible and entitled equally with non-slaveholders to all the privileges and immunities of their several unions, and especially to receive any agency, mission, or other appointment which may run within the scope of their operation or duties. Resolve that to prevent a gradual departure from the principles of church independence and the assumption by societies, boards, or committees of the inalienable rights of the churches, as well as to prevent the recurrence of difficulties in the future, this convention do hold that in all those conventions, societies, or boards of which we may be a constituent part, whenever the competency or fitness of an individual to receive an appointment is under discussion, if any question arises affecting his morals or his standing in fellowship as a Christian, such question should not be disposed of to the grief of the party without ultimate appeal to the particular church of which such individual is a member, as being the only body on earth authorized by the Scriptures or competent to consider and decide this class of cases. Now you're going to see these issues appeal. That's an appeal to the final authority of the local church in judging the competency of people to be appointed as ministers in different situations. The first one was demanding not by means of application of a particular person, but a hypothetical case being presented, and they demanded the distinct, explicit avowal that slaveholders are eligible and entitled equally with non-slaveholders to all the privileges and immunities of their several unions. So an affirmation of the priority and finality of the authority of the local church. We have this hypothetical case in which there is the demand for a distinct, explicit avowal of the equality of slaveholders with non-slaveholders in their being appointed as missionaries. So the acting board received this, and they answered. And we have received from you a copy of the preamble and resolutions which were passed by the Baptist State Convention of Alabama. And as there is a demand for distinct, explicit answers from our board to the inquiries and propositions which you have been pleased to make, we have given to them our deliberate and candid attention. Before proceeding to answer them, allow us to express our profound regret that they were addressed to us. They were not necessary. We have never, as a board, either done or omitted to do anything which requires the explanations and avowals that your resolutions demanded. They also place us in the new and trying position of being compelled to answer hypothetical questions and to discuss principles, or of seeming to be evasive and timid and not daring to give you the information and satisfaction which you desire. If, therefore, in answering with entire frankness your inquiries and demands, we should express opinions which may be unsatisfactory or displeasing to you, our plea must be that a necessity was laid upon us. We had no other alternative without being wanting, apparently, in that manly openness which ought to characterize the correspondence of Christian brethren. And they move down to the second resolution. Your second resolution, you demand the distinct, explicit avowal that slaveholders are eligible and entitled to all the privileges and immunities of their several unions, and especially to receive any agency, mission, or other appointment which may fall within the scope of their operations and duties. We need not say that slaveholders, as well as non-slaveholders, are unquestionably entitled to all the privileges and immunities which the Constitution of the Baptist General Convention permits and grants to its members. We would not deprive either of any of the immunities of the mutual contract, In regard, however, to any agency, mission, or other appointment, no slaveholder or non-slaveholder, however large his subscription to foreign missions, or those of the church with which he is connected, is on that account entitled to be appointed to an agency or a mission. The appointing power, for wise and good reasons, has been confided to the acting board. They hold themselves accountable to the convention for the discreet and faithful discharge of this trust. Should you say the above remarks are not sufficiently explicit, we wish distinctly to know whether the board would or would not appoint a slaveholder as a missionary. Before directly replying, we would say that in the 30 years in which the board has existed, no slaveholder, to our knowledge, has applied to be a missionary. And as we send out no domestics or servants. Now this is, of course, this is a General Missionary Convention, not the Home Mission Society. So they're not just ignoring the Reeve case. That was to a different organization. And as we send out no domestics or servants, such an event as a missionary taking slaves with him, were it morally right, could not, in accordance with all of our past arrangements or present plans, possibly occur. If, however, one should offer himself as a missionary, having slaves, and should insist on retaining them as his property, we could not appoint him. One thing is certain, we can never be a party to any arrangement which would imply approbation of slavery. And they went on with answering other resolutions. But that was the key. That was the key point. If, however, anyone should offer himself as a missionary having slaves and should insist on retaining them as his property, we could not appoint him. One thing is certain, we can never be a party to any arrangement which would imply approbation of slavery. So that answer was given in November of 1844. By December of 1844, the Virginia Baptist Foreign Mission Society had issued a call to Baptists in the South to meet in Augusta, Georgia, in order to establish a new missionary organization. Baptists in the South felt that in principle, because of the wording of this answer from the acting board, they had been excluded from the union that they had enjoyed in home missions, in foreign missions, and in they didn't separate from the Publication Society yet. So there is a break has now occurred. A statement a question has been asked. A statement has been made that clearly states that the acting board will not appoint a slaveholder as a missionary, not merely for pragmatic reasons, but for moral reasons. We could not do anything that would imply approbation of slavery. So when the Virginia Baptist Missionary Society issued this call, Baptists in the South responded. Around 300 messengers then met in Augusta, Georgia in 1845 to establish the Southern Baptist Convention. The president of the South Carolina Baptist Convention, any questions about this at this point? I'm trying to be as clear and straightforward about this as the documents permit. W.B. Johnson, William Beline Johnson, was the president of the South Carolina Baptist Convention. William Beline Johnson is a person who has always been confusing to me in several ways. He's a very strong believer in the sovereignty of God. I've published a little book called Southern Baptist Sermons on Sovereignty and Responsibility, and he has a sermon in there that's anyways, it's I can't remember the exact title, but love. I think it's love characteristic of the deity, and he is giving an Edwardian exposition of an intra-Trinitarian love and the infinite excellence of that love, and is that love that prompts us, is that love that draws us, is that love that binds us to the gospel, it's according to that love that we that we seek to proclaim the gospel. It's really an excellent sermon. But W.B. Johnson also, not only was he an Edwardian in that sense, he had followed the theology that developed out of sort of a mutilation of the thought of Edwards by some of his followers, in which several theological issues had been promoted that were not consistent with Edwards and not consistent with confessional orthodoxy. W.B. Johnson rejected the whole idea of imputation. He did not believe in justification by faith on the basis of the imputed righteousness of Christ. He did not believe in substitutionary atonement on the basis of our sin being imputed to Christ. He was a strange bird in that sense. He was even disciplined in a church in Georgia for some of his theological views. It was a church that actually he had helped plant. And so he was at once admired in many ways, but was very troubling in many ways. He was a part of a small group in South Carolina that had adopted this new divinity of theology. But he was what I would call a denominational and organizational genius. He understood all the principles of Baptist polity. He understood the manner in which Baptists in history had joined together without violating the autonomy of the local church. In this year, he was the president of the South Carolina Baptist Convention. And he called a meeting of that convention, or at least of some of the committees in the South Carolina Baptist Convention. And they put together a proposal as to how this new convention that was going to be formed in Augusta, Georgia, what it should look like. So he came with this plan basically in his pocket as to how the convention would be organized. The thing that had bothered him about the union in the three different societies that Baptists had formed during the early part of the 19th century was that it did not give any consistent, uniform unity to the churches from a denominational way. There was such a fear of an overarching authority that they kept these three organizations as societies. Johnson was convinced of the associational method of organizing. You remember we talked about the difference between the society method and the associational method, the weaknesses and strengths of both. Well, he was convinced of this associational method, that there should be a single denomination and that the benevolences should arise out of the will of the denomination itself. So when he came to Augusta, his statement was that the new convention should embody the whole denomination together, with separate and distinct boards for each object of benevolent enterprise. That was one of the lines in the paper that he had presented. As they would discuss things, W.B. Johnson was actually elected president of this consultative convention. That's what this was called, the consultative convention. And as he made this presentation and set forth this as a goal, people seemed to be agreeable to it. And so Johnson appointed a committee to prepare a preamble and a resolution. This was presented then on the opening day. On the second day, this preamble and resolution were discussed, amended, and adopted. It accused the General Missionary Convention of innovation, introducing new principles and new ideas that had not been a part of the original arrangement. It accused them of violating specific requirements of the Constitution in the decision they had made in answer to the Alabama Resolution, and thus sought to place the the reason for the separation in the unfaithfulness of the General Missionary Convention to their common goals. So, in light of that, there was an agreement, because of this violation, because of the inability of Baptists in the South to work with the Baptists in the North under that particular arrangement, another committee was appointed, which consisted of the original committee plus 8 persons. And this was to establish a new preamble, just a statement of the basic occasion, the reasons that have prompted the meeting, and a constitution. That committee met that evening after the second day, and by the third day they were ready with the preamble and the Constitution. These were received, they were discussed, and they were approved. There was very vigorous discussion, there was some hesitation. People realized that this would create difficulties with friendships that they had established with many people in the North. There was hesitation on the part of some of these messengers in the South. There were differing degrees of support for the issue of slavery. In the year 1844, P.H. Mell had written a book defending, he said, that slavery is neither an economic, social, political, nor moral evil. He did an extensive examination of all the passages in Scripture related to slavery and the ownership of slaves by the patriarchs and the admonitions of the apostles relative to slaves and masters. He did an extensive work on that. He said that those who are seeking to impugn the character of Southerners by calling them immoral must look into the Scripture and say the same thing about the patriarchs and about the apostles and about the Lord Jesus himself, because he never called it a moral evil, and so forth. So Baptists in the South, we had begun to develop a very strong defense of slavery. There was perhaps one of the most sort of reasonable interactions where you can find out what the issues really were between North and South was a debate between Richard Fuller and Francis Wayland. Francis Wayland was the president of Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island. A very strong writer. He had written a book called Elements of Moral Science, in which he has a section on slavery and talks about the reasons why slavery should be seen only as a temporary measure in the Bible, but not as something that was designed to be defended as morally right. Whereas Richard Fuller argued argued the case from another position. But if you want to see the most friendly and fraternal and rational interaction based upon scriptural argumentation, and understand the hermeneutics and understand the basic substance behind it, that's what you should read. It actually is in print. I think Keith Harper and Nathan Finn edited the volume, and it's actually in print now. So that is, well, a debate on slavery. I think it's the debate between Francis Wayland and Richard Fuller. Within the context, therefore, of this formation of the new convention, there was a growing debate of a very specific nature concerning the biblical view of slavery. And